Welcome everybody to the broadcast. We are just getting started here. We're recording and watching some participants filter in. So we'll get started in just a moment. Until then, just let me know that you can hear me, because it helps to know that the microphone's working, that you're tuning in. You'll see a chat button in Zoom. You can click on that and just tell us where you're tuning in from. That'll also give Marcus some perspective, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. But thank you so much for coming to the program today. Let's see here. I'm going to open up the chat and just make sure that this is working too. I'm in upstate New York right now, Ithaca, New York, and it's snowy, it's sunny, really bright. Fantastic, great. So Kathleen, you can hear us. Kathleen and Ryan at Protect PT in Harrison City, Pennsylvania. Great, great to see you, Kathleen. So if you've been to one of the Health to Harm webinars, you know that the format is sort of, we do brief introductions and then we shift into the presentation, and then there's room for Q&A. So I'm personally really excited about this presentation because I'm very task-oriented. So I like the idea of being able to do something that maybe feels like vacation, like go to a national park or travel, but then also know how I can participate in collecting data. But then also just from the data perspective, being able to know that there are volunteers that want to help monitor what's happening, help monitor industry. So yesterday, folks with Halt Mariner Now hosted a webinar on watchdogging and reporting. So more the nitty gritty of, what to look for and how to report specifically on oil and gas infrastructure. And so we'll have that replay available for everybody soon. But yeah, maybe some of you that are tuning in now were at that webinar as well. I know there's some connection there with Protect PT. But anyway, yeah, let me know where you're tuning in from. Use the chat, and I'm gonna show you a couple slides to get started about what to expect from today's presentation. So the three things that you're gonna learn is examples on how Adventure Scientists as an organization partners with environmental and human health leaders, and learning how to tap into their network of volunteers. So seeing some examples of work that they've done and getting some ideas on how you might be able to do that. So yeah, brainstorming how you can most quickly and cost effectively access data. And hello, Liz in Denver. Great to have you here. So if you haven't met me, I'm Ryan. I'm gonna be sort of the MC of this webinar. I work with Halt to Harm Network on the operations team. Halt to Harm Network is a network of different people and organizations that are fighting the oil and gas industry, working to defend their communities from the harms of fracking. But we've expanded beyond just specifically fracking, oil and gas as a whole, because we see how it's all connected. HaltToHarm.net is our website, and on the operations team, my job is to, help host these things, but we don't have our own campaigns. What we do is we connect with you and other members of the network to say, this is a platform and there's a lot of people on this platform that you can share your work with. So that's how this came about. Marcus Pearson is our guest today from Adventure Scientists. Hello, how's it going, Marcus?
Going well. Now that I'm not on mute anymore, it's going really well. Thank you. Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate the chance to speak with all of you and learn more about what you're up to and give you a little snapshot of what we do at Adventure Scientists.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're able to do this as well. And real quick, Natasha, hello, Natasha in Colorado, and Dawn in Kansas. It's pretty cool to see the range of participation. So I already reviewed the agenda, but just to introduce Marcus, and then we'll get into presentation. Marcus leads Adventure Scientists' efforts to expand the programs, brings nearly 15 years of legal and policy experience in landscape, wildlife, and resource conservation efforts in the US and Latin America. And before joining Adventure Scientists, Marcus spent several years practicing environmental law and also provided general counsel and operational compliance advice to a variety of business and nonprofit clients. So yeah, we're excited to learn a bit about your background, and also you completed a 9,000-mile journey from Mexico to Argentina by bus, foot, and hitchhiking. So it's cool to, hopefully we can hear a little bit about that as well. And hello to Robin in West Virginia. Few logistics. You can chat anytime to me and ask questions. You can add questions to the Q&A for later. If you get kicked off the webinar, if you have problems, email me. I'll check it. I'll have it open so that I can help troubleshoot if you need help. And we will be recording this discussion and then sending you the replay. You can watch and you can share the replay at halttheharm.net/webinars. And without further ado, let's get into the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. I'll share my screen so that you all will be able to see it. Give me just one moment. I will share the just one moment. Sometimes Zoom gives a little trouble with this, so I will do that really quickly. Make sure I've got all the right everything up, and I will hide my notes so you guys don't have to see it. And here we go. So Ryan, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for taking the time today to sit and chat a little bit and learn a bit more about Adventure Scientists. As Ryan mentioned, this talk today will really be focused on using outdoor athletes to support science and advocacy. I'll talk a little bit more about our organization, but I want to walk through the outline for today. It's one of my lingering trainings as a recovering lawyer is to really give a roadmap to the day. So I'm going to start today with a question that I'll show on the next page, chat a little bit more about who Adventure Scientists is, what we do, what we've learned over the past 8 going on 9 years as an organization, and then 2 to 3 case studies depending on time, showing some successes and learning moments that hopefully you all can take away from and get some ideas flowing and generated about how there might be opportunities to engage our volunteer network, work with Adventure Scientists, and help to move the ball forward and move the needle on some of the issues related to advocacy against oil and gas expansion that you all are working so deeply in. So I wanted to pose this question first, just to get your thought process and juices flowing, which is, how does data or lack thereof affect your ability to tell your story, to advocate for the communities that you're working in, to advocate for the issue that you're working on? Are you thinking, hey, I just need more data. I could do more if I were just functioning on a larger scale with data collection? Thinking about some of those barriers to using data or collecting data to move the ball forward on your work that's so important to you and the community and the organization that you represent. So who we are and what we do. What is Adventure Scientists? So we are a global NGO based in Bozeman, Montana, that works with scientific partners to collect hard to access data by recruiting, training, and managing members of the outdoor adventure community. I'll speak a little bit more about some examples, but just to give you the 30,000 foot level, our scientific partners include the US Forest Service, Harvard Medical School, World Resources Institute, and others who are trying to tackle some pretty significant environmental and human health challenges and need to collect data from the field, often in hard to reach areas of the world, in order to address those challenges, make better decisions, make better management decisions, and push advocacy issues forward so that change and positive change can occur. Who am I though? So as Ryan mentioned, I won't go too much into my background. I will tell a bit about how I got to where I am. I spent nearly a decade as an environmental lawyer, most recently with Earth Justice. And I hit a crossroads while working a case on wolverines. I'd been litigating, I'd been diving through administrative records, I'd been doing a lot of research and fighting with people for a long time. And I stumbled across a report that adventure scientists had produced along with the Forest Service regarding wolverine habitat and range and the impacts of climate change and reduced snowpack on wolverine denning. That was the exact issue that I needed in order, kind of the smoking gun, so to speak, that was not in the administrative record, but I needed to get it in there in order to advocate on behalf of the wolverine. So I tried to get that data into the administrative record, better data for better decision-making. And then I called adventure scientists and I said, I don't know if you track this. I don't know whether this is something that you, a story you need to tell, but this is how I use your data set. And also, I noticed that your office is right down the street from mine. Can we sit down and have lunch sometime? About a year later, I ended up as the director of program investments and general counsel at Adventure Scientists. Ryan mentioned that I did spend time traveling through Mexico and Central and South America. I was working on farms and hitchhiking and hiking and taking buses throughout the region. One of the things that really drove me forward during that was seeing the inequities that had developed over time with communities who were being impacted by decisions, business decisions, by governmental decisions, and they felt like they had very little control or ability to push back against things like a new factory going in, or their water quality being tainted by poor sewage treatment, or by ineffectual government, or by businesses that really wanted just to parachute in and pull the resources out and then leave, which is something that I'm sure you're all really familiar with at Halt the Harm Network. But seeing that at a region-wide scale really drove me into the advocacy world in the first place. And being in the advocacy world drove me to realize that better data can often lead to better decisions and more impactful advocacy actions based on the needs of the communities and the needs of the ecosystems that support those communities. Another fun fact is I ended up meeting my wife on that trip. We were both backpacking and we ran into each other in a campsite, and 13 years later we're still together. So that's I think a good testament to the power of being in a new place and experiencing an ecosystem in a really deep way. So that wolverine case is really part of adventure scientists' vision that one day, no matter where you need data, there will be trained adventurers able to reach those hard to access corners of the world and willing to answer the call of scientists to collect that data. We're making some headway. So this map here shows the starting point of successful expeditions undertaken by adventurers on behalf of our partners since 2011. This is up current through 2017, so it doesn't include projects over the last 2 years. The short story is that we've had dozens of partners, over 130 projects, and thousands of volunteers in our network around the world. For instance, we've collected the highest known plant samples on Earth at more than 21,000 feet from Camp 2 in Everest. We've also collected water quality samples from more than 500 feet below the ocean surface and everywhere in between. So our ability to reach scale is something that we're proud of, and at the same time, we want to be able to scale and help our partners scale their impact for the projects and issues that they're working on. But what have we learned over these 8 years? And I really want to spend some time now on this section, because these are some of the learning lessons and also some of the ways that we can continue to improve and become better as a partner. We are a fee-for-service organization, so our partners are typically paying for our services, and we want to make sure that we're providing good services to them. So these are the 4 main learning lessons that I really want to hope that you all take with you today. Obviously, they're here on the board, but partnerships, understanding the partner's problem and the jobs to be done that the partners need, the importance of data quality to decision-making, and ultimately the importance of using technology both in the field and during the training and management process for volunteers in order to ensure that we can have a scaled, uniform data collection effort that meets the quality standards that our partners need in order to make those more well-informed decisions, or in order to go to court and battle on behalf of the communities, the ecosystems, the species, the landscapes that are so important to them. So first off, everything we do happens in partnership. It's by having conversations with our partners like these that we understand the data needs, can actually build projects that meet the needs as opposed to a project that's a solution in search of a problem, and then manage volunteers and data to a standard that allows our partners to take that data, take those samples and use them for their intended end use. Our partners are everyone from Fish and Wildlife Service, as you can see here, to Natural Resources Defense Council, World Resources Institute, Harvard Medical School, and others around the world. So we have a broad-based partnership network that doesn't discriminate between agencies who might use the data for decision-making, advocacy groups who might be pushing the needle and forcing the agency's hand in making decisions, thoughtful and forward-thinking and progressive companies that want to make sure that they're doing right by their supply chain and doing right by the resources that they're using, and also, as I alluded to before, the scientific community at large, places like Harvard Medical School. So how do we vet our projects? We won't just take anything that comes through the door. So we vet our project based on 3 main qualities here, as you can see. It's a very broad set of categories, and during conversations, I usually really try to dig in a little bit more and ask a lot of questions that will try to get to the nut of the problem. And that second bullet point there, a pathway from data collection to tangible outcomes, is really the focus that I try to take when I have conversations. Most scientists and most advocates know that there are data limitations on issues that are important to them, and that's why they're maybe stalling out on their research or having a difficult time advocating in a more effective way, is that there is a data limitation. The third point, obviously, is important for our volunteer network. There are many citizen science groups out there that are doing really great work. Our niche is that we work really closely with the outdoor adventure community to get to those areas of the world that other groups can't get, or won't be able to get, or scientists can't get. And we can do it at scale in a way that's really efficient. So we need to make sure that we're looking at projects from a lens of how difficult is it to get to the data, and can we do that? And by the adventure community, we certainly have been able to do that. So this learning lesson, which is achieving the partner's jobs to be done, this goes to the second bullet point in the previous slide, which is, what is the tangible pathway from the data collection to an outcome? I'm always asking, what is the problem? Like, what are you trying to deal with? What do you need help with? And by digging in and asking a lot of questions, we try to craft the right approach for a partner's issue. Sometimes when we get down to the bottom of the problem and we say, well, it doesn't seem like working with adventure scientists is even the right approach, because you might have a data set already and what it needs is analysis, or you might have a solution in hand, or you might have the boots on the ground in order to address the problem yourself. If we can at least help walk through what the problem is and help a partner or potential partner get to the next step in their work, we feel like that's a win for us. Ultimately, we would love to work with all the partners that we talk to, but we want to make sure that we're approaching it from a problem-based point of view as opposed to a solution-based point of view. A really big learning lesson for us is data quality. So from early on, our organization has been really focused on providing a strong data quality and checkpoints in our field data collection and data management efforts. So every project that we've launched, certainly since I've been here for the past 3 years, has had a project level quality assurance and quality control plan, really rigorous training modules. Part of those training modules include developing a learning management software that allows for training hundreds of volunteers to a level that our partners need them to be trained to. We require our volunteers to pass tests at 100% in order to know that they are both ready with the background of the issue at hand, whether it's fracking or whether it's wildlife connectivity or whether it's illegal timber harvest. We try to get them the context for why they're collecting the data. We also get them really deep learning and understanding of the data collection methodology and protocol that the partners need. And we work really closely, we have 7 folks on our project management team that really manage the volunteer management. They're constantly in contact. They're constantly making sure that our volunteers are getting to the right place to collect the right data in the right methodology in the right way, and then getting that data into the right hands so that our partners can use that information. So data quality really helps us ensure stronger outcomes for our partners, and that's something that's important to us. Another thing is that technology really helps our partners and our volunteers streamline the data collection process. I mentioned learning management software that allows us to reach more volunteers, to train more in a more effective manner. In the field, there are a number of different ways that we approach it. You know, our timber project that I'll speak about in a moment, we used, collected over 1,000 samples in one field season where everything was connected through a QR code and an app that would be able to collect metadata and connect back to that QR code. So a physical sample had a metadata cache associated with it, and that QR code was attached to all the physical samples so that it ensured chain of custody, which is what our partners at World Resources Institute and the Fish and Wildlife Service needed in order to be able to do the work they needed to do, which I'll speak about in a moment. Another is field devices. In the world of fracking and oil and gas, they're, you know, one of the different ways that we've seen that people can more effectively identify where an illegal, you know, natural gas well might be, or where there might be, you know, an oil well where there shouldn't be, or the expansion of an area is through satellite imagery, is through deploying drones that can identify methane plumes, those sorts of things. There are other sorts of field devices that we've used as well, like camera traps and acoustic listening devices that can, for example, listen for the sounds of illegal timber harvest. So technology really helps us think outside the box and helps our partner think outside the box to get a more robust data set that can be both uniform and usable. So now those are some of the 4 lessons learned. And I know that we've been about 10 minutes of talking. So I was going to have 3 case studies. I will skip over one of the case studies, which is this global microplastics inventory. I'll save that for the end if there's additional time. So bear with me, I will blast through this without talking about it. And I will come back to it as necessary. This next effort here is one of our offerings, which is called a platform offering. So we have the ability to do a full-scale project management where we're taking care of recruiting, training, and managing the outdoor adventures in the field. And that includes everything from screening the volunteers, going through the training process that I mentioned before, ensuring quality, managing volunteers in the field, making sure that the chain of custody for the sample collection of the data collection is complete and gets to the partner in a way that they can analyze it and use it. That service is, you know, we have 7 people working on that. It's a useful service and we're able to scale it. And we're able to, for example, do a global survey where we can send thousands of volunteers out around the world to collect water quality. That costs money. And it's not a cheap proposition, but it also is able to do quite a bit more and scale the data collection of our partners in a very meaningful way, to a tune of, you know, the hard cost might be $100,000, and the volunteer in-kind contribution might be somewhere along the lines of $1 million, because we have volunteers out in the field who are offering their time, energy, gear, and effort to get to these hard to reach places. Still, $100,000 might be a lot of money. So we have started developing other ways of helping our partners address their problems that might be more of a limited scope engagement that also gives our partners access to our volunteer network. So this is a good example that I want to talk a bit about, in part because it's a really geographically limited project. And it's a project where our partners were willing to take on the training and management of the volunteers. All we had to do was get the volunteers to the partner at the right time and in the right place. So what is the Saguaro Survey? The Saguaro National Park has, since 1990, completed a saguaro census across their managed lands. This happens once every 10 years. So 1990, 2000, 2010, and now 2020. So this has been happening for 40 years now. And the national park uses this data to understand how saguaros are changing across their range in both size and population dynamics. And it also helps, because it's been a long-term study, it helps understand some of the dynamics of climate change in the US Southwest. And the project study area as a whole comprises 45 randomly located 4-hectare plots within Saguaro National Park. If any of you folks are familiar with the Southwest or have been to Saguaro National Park, it's very rugged. It's really difficult to access a number of these sites. And our partners at Saguaro National Park were having trouble recruiting people to go into some of the more remote locations and collect observational data in these 4-hectare plots. So our partners were willing to be able to train and manage the volunteers. All they needed was, and continue to need, are rugged outdoor people who can get to these areas. So we needed to make sure that we were minimizing the cost for our partner, because the National Park Service, like every federal agency, is pretty limited in their funding right now. But they needed the skilled and reliable outdoor adventurers to access 10 really hard to access sites. That's all they needed. We didn't need to deal with the training or the management and all the infrastructure that goes along with it. And so we said, you know, we can make sure that those screen volunteers get to you. The Saguaro National Park, on their side of things, you know, they paid us a much smaller fee, and they agreed to train the volunteers in the protocol and wanted to manage the volunteers in the field, to be on site to identify some of the different nuances that might come along with this survey that they've done over time. The volunteers, for their part, are collecting GPS coordinates for all observed saguaros in these sites, measuring the diameters and heights of the saguaros, recording the characteristics of each saguaro that they see, and then sweeping these plots for little baby saguaros that are kind of hard to see. Those baby saguaros show whether the next generation of saguaros will be able to survive, thrive, and be resilient in the face of climate change. So a very important project for the Park Service, taking advantage of their limited funds and also their willingness to work with the volunteers. We were able to get them just the recruits that they needed to carry out this work. On the other side of the spectrum is a case study that I want to speak about that we're calling timber tracking. So this is a large scale regional need that not only is regional to the United States, but also is place-based globally. So what do I mean by that? So the goal really for our partners is addressing illegal timber harvest and climate change. As you can see, this map here shows all the forests around the world, and then I'm colorblind, but it also shows areas where forests are being degraded at a rapid rate. So you can see areas like the Amazon and the Congo Basin, and areas in Russia and Eastern Europe, but also including forested areas in North America, in the United States and Canada. So what is one of the issues here? It's that many areas of the world are continue to lose their forest landscapes. And why is that happening? Well, in many cases, it's through illegal timber harvest. Illegal timber harvest is a global problem, and some estimate up to $150 billion a year black market around the world. Up to 30% of global timber could be illegally harvested. In some places, it's as high as 70%. In Peru and Bolivia and Brazil, for example, that's the going rate. This is a very difficult issue to crack because it's a really long supply chain. It's super opaque, and it's hard for law enforcement to do its job. One of the ways to address it, according to the World Resources Institute and the Global Timber Tracking Network and the Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service, is to build these reference libraries of DNA, so genetic reference libraries of various different commercially valuable and ecologically valuable tree species. So the only problem with that is that many of the tree species individuals that are in herbaria, botanical gardens basically around the world, don't do a very good job of representing the entire range of a species. So they need fresh data and samples from the field, from the entire range of these various different species, in order to build a genetic reference library that could be used by law enforcement to identify not only whether a suspicious shipment is what it says it is, but also where that shipment came from. So not just the species, but also the provenance of that individual tree. So if it came from a national park, they would know. You know, illegal timber harvest is not simply an international problem. It's certainly an issue that has reared its head in the United States as well. This map isn't working very well, but what it shows is over time, the decrease in virgin forest in the United States. Where we were in, for example, 1620 and where we are today are vastly different. What you're not seeing is that the Western US, in particular, the Sierras, the Cascades, and the Rockies have been decimated over the past 100, 150 years. And that continues, and illegal timber harvest continues in those areas as well as many other areas around the North American continent. So how can we address this? And how can adventurers address this? Our partners wanted to target first big leaf maple, and our role was to train and send volunteers into the field to collect the raw data that will serve as the baseline for a genetic reference library for big leaf maple. Big leaf maple is a beautiful wood. It is used for guitar making and furniture making, and it fetches a lot on the market, especially the black market. So they're seeing an increase in big leaf maple poaching throughout the Northwest, throughout its range really, but really focused in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. So World Resources Institute and the Forest Service funded a pilot to see if this type of data collection, sample collection in the field could be used to create genetic reference libraries for other species around the world. Big leaf maple was the guinea pig, and adventure scientists sent the boots on the ground out to be the guinea pigs in collecting the samples and making sure that the protocol was robust enough. So the sampling effort is already being put to the test in a meaningful way. I can't talk much about it right now, but what does it look like? So how do we confront the challenge of getting the volunteers into the right place at the right time? This map here shows the expansion of sample collection over the course of a field season for big leaf maple last year. We collected over 1,000 samples, and we had over 120 volunteers doing that throughout the range from San Diego up through Vancouver Island. We had to use more sophisticated systems to ensure volunteers returned safely, to ensure that they had the tools they needed to do the job. We needed to take advantage of partnerships with mapping apps and other apps to give volunteers the tools to navigate and collect the data. So using, as I said, QR codes to ensure chain of custody, which is what the Forest Service needed. Using offline mapping apps to get volunteers to the right place where we anticipated big leaf maple would grow. And then using a different app called Magpie to make sure that we had a uniform metadata collection effort. And that has already shown to be helpful, as the Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service have already started building this library, and law enforcement is starting to ask for access to this library in order to address big leaf maple poaching. So with that effort in hand, we thought and spoke with our partners and worked to identify 3 additional species. So between this year and next year, we're targeting 3 other species: redwoods, coast redwoods, and then 2 cedar species: Alaska yellow cedar and western red cedar. Both are commercially valuable. All 3 are commercially valuable, and they're threatened by climate change, in particular the Alaska yellow cedar and the coast redwood. So the key role for this effort is to say, okay, well, we did 1 species in 1 year. Is it possible to scale this effort and do it across a much broader geographic range, as you can see, and in a way that collects a significantly higher number of samples? So we went from about 1,000 samples in year 1 to this effort over 2 years, we're collecting about 7,000 samples across the range. And that range is basically from Big Sur in California all the way up through Anchorage, Alaska, and inland as far as Glacier National Park. So as of September, we've collected about 2,200 samples in the year 2019. That's been updated since then. We've now hit a goal to get over 1,000 samples of coast redwood this year. We've also collected about 800 western red cedar and about 500 Alaska yellow cedar samples. And it's broken down in the following way, where we're collecting leaves, cones, and cores in a uniform manner. Think about this similarly to collecting observational data across an entire landscape to look for oil and gas wells, or to look for evidence of new roads being cut into Bears Ears, potentially, or in areas where fracking has already been established. Thinking about how to stay ahead of the 8 ball, really, when it comes down to collecting data for advocacy purposes. These leaves, cones, and cores are are already in line to be used for law enforcement purposes, especially Western red cedar, which is an important species commercially, but also is being cut down at an alarmingly fast rate across its range. So what do our partners think of this at the end of the day? I'll leave these quotes up while just saying that, look, the job to be done here was really to ensure data quality, to make sure that law enforcement had the tools it needed to do its job, which is crack down on illegal timber harvest. The second job to be done was to ensure that the initial pilot year in 2018 was successful and could be scaled across different species and across different regions. We're in conversations right now with other groups to expand this work into the Congo Basin, Eastern Europe, the Amazon, areas where illegal timber harvest is rampant, and there are different dangers involved and different challenges involved. But by being able to understand what the job to be done is, we can do a much better job of trying to improve upon and continue to grow this effort and address illegal timber harvest across a global scale. So I will end there. Happy to answer questions, go through a Q&A session, chat more. I know that some of you chimed in during the course of the talk. I'm happy to talk through that now. And if there is time at the end, I'd love to show you a quick video of some of our earlier work that shows kind of a global reach and the scientific partner that made it happen. So thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for presentation. And we do have a question here from Robin. And before we get into that, anybody else who has a question, there's a Q&A button in your Zoom panel, and you can add something in there, but also feel free to just jump in the chat. It's a nice group, and I think we can handle it in the chat. So Robin says, I'm interested to know if you have any Adventure Scientist Network members within the Ohio River Basin region who would be interested in a project related to baseline microplastics and other pollutants sampling in the river. The Ohio is the tap water source for 5 million people, yet considered by some to be the most polluted river in the US. It's also at risk to soon be increasingly polluted by petrochemical industry development.
A great question, Robin. You know, funny story, our founder is he's from Ohio. He's from the Cleveland area. And so we have long had an interest in trying to figure out how to work in that area. We had a potential project that was focused on abandoned oil and gas wells throughout the Ohio River Basin and up into Pennsylvania and Kentucky as well. And that is on hold for now, given some partner priorities that didn't really align with how we felt we could do the best job. But with respect to microplastics and respect to, you know, basically a tap water source for 5 million people, we are about to launch a project that will be a 4-year effort, not on microplastics, but on water quality in wild and scenic river basins around the country. So working with federal agency partners and state water quality agencies who are bound to use the data and have to use the data in order to improve impaired waters, to try to address some of the major and pressing water quality data gaps in the wild and scenic river system. About 50% of the wild and scenic river system is impaired, known to be impaired. About 25% more of the wild and scenic river system has never been assessed for any baseline water quality constituent. So there is a significant concern, given that wild and scenic rivers provide water to about 10% of the US population, in addition to all the ecosystem values that a clean watershed brings to a community and to the habitat for species and fisheries and recreation that go along with it. There are some pretty significant unknowns in the wild and scenic river system. I'm trying to think off the top of my head whether there are wild and scenic rivers in the Ohio Basin. I know there are some further north up in the upper Midwest, and there are some in Kentucky and West Virginia, I believe, as well. I don't know if in Ohio today we would be deploying volunteers for that work. it'd certainly be something really fascinating to talk about, not just for the water quality question and safe drinking water, but also for the importance that water plays in our daily lives. We did a 4-year effort that was related to microplastics, which might relate more to your question. I skipped over that case study, but one of the things that we did identify there is that not just locally, but globally, there's an incredibly high rate of microplastics concentration in all water, aquatic or in freshwater and marine systems, including in glacial runoff in in the Himalayas, areas that have never had human footprints have microplastics concentrations. And groups since then have requested the data set, including the WHO and the EPA, because I think they're concerned about the same questions you're concerned about, is what are microplastics doing to our bodies? We just don't know the answer to that. And having a data set is a great first step, but it's just a first step. If there's any evidence that the next step is, well, we need to do localized studies and do really deep dives into watersheds that provide drinking water resources to metropolitan areas or even micropolitan areas, then I think it would be really worth looking into. For what it's worth, we stepped away from the microplastics work about a year ago on an active basis, but we did put together a toolkit, and that toolkit's available to allow community groups to be able to follow the same procedures that we did in order to collect the data in the same way that we did the water quality data, in the same way that we did to help identify any microplastics concentrations in the water. So I'd be happy to talk more about it offline if you'd like, to see where there might be an alignment or maybe just point in the right direction as to next steps. But it's an incredibly important issue and one we know very little about.
Marcus, I wonder if maybe because if your focus is more on the wild and scenic river systems, maybe you could have some suggestions for how to coordinate a volunteer effort. Because I know a lot of the leaders in the network are doing work in grassroots areas and in places that are really impacted by industry. And so even just like the logistics, like how would you brief a team of volunteers who get together at a meeting and say, I'm ready to go spread out and collect samples? Like how would you organize something like that?
It's a really good question. I am not on the project management team. I can give you what I bet would be their best answer to this, or my best guess at their best answer, is that the effort that goes into training and management of volunteers is often something that's underestimated. Training volunteers and walking them through a training process and getting them into the field, recruiting them in the first place, that kind of pre-field collection effort takes us about 6 months with a team of 7 people to do across a large landscape. So that's not to mention, permitting and some other questions that might come up when you're trying to get to some of these areas or access. So just the recruitment, training, and management of volunteers takes about 6 months, and a room of engaged and excited people is a great first step. The next step is to have a training module or set of modules that would, in an ideal world, be able to be interactive and allow the trainer, so folks here on the call who might be the trainers or adventure scientists as a trainer, to be able to make sure that we're training those volunteers in a way so that we know that when they hit the field, they'll be prepared to take on whatever data collection challenge might crop up. Our training module for our timber project, for example, we printed it out and it was 80 pages long. So it was basically a 6-hour online training with interactive videos and questions. And if you've ever been on a webinar and they ask you, to answer a couple questions to make sure that you're still listening, we had those crop up during the course of the training as well to ensure engagement and ensure long-term retention of information. Mm-hmm. We also So I guess that's a long answer to the short
Yeah.
question, which
And,
is training takes a long time, but it's something that if you have a good infrastructure in place can be done
yeah.
really well.
And Robin responded with a couple things. Said, I don't think the Ohio River is in the wild and scenic river system, but some tributaries might be. I'd like to talk to someone further about this. West Virginia is also inundated with fracking wells, and this will get worse if the petrochemical system called the Appalachian Storage Hub is constructed. Our state regulators and even Oransco, ORSANCO, can't or won't look at these issues in depth. And then Robin also responded, I know training volunteers and establishing testing sites is complicated. I manage a stream testing program in 5 counties in West Virginia along the route of the Mountaineer Express pipeline.
So you know the challenges.
Yeah, and I think on the other end of the spectrum, like Frac Tracker, for example, has a mobile app where people can use to take pictures and submit things that's geolocated for their for some of their mapping efforts. So they've actually made it so simple that in fact there was even an effort a while back to like hire people on the internet through Upwork just as an experiment and say, hey, here's like $100 to like as a one-time job through sort of a crowdsourced thing to go out to these places and take some pictures and submit them into the app. So it required absolutely no training. So it's like an interesting to think about maybe what data you need and what are the parameters around that data, to help you understand how much training, because certainly the type of data that you're talking about requires like certain very strict parameters to make sure that you can really say with certainty this was a scientific effort.
I think it's a great point, Ryan. And I think as well, it's really key to think about the power that comes with putting data collection in the hands of people who aren't trained field biologists or field technicians. There's so much energy out there, as you all are well aware, more so than I, about the energy to try to address some of these issues, that handing people a tool that they can use in a way that's really meaningful and also can be useful for decision-making purposes is maybe one of the most powerful things that we can do in this that we're living in today.
Environmental Health Project too is they have their environmental health channel, and that they're doing a lot of efforts around trying to crowdsource data. So if anyone's interested and not familiar with them, look up Environmental Health Project. Don had a question I wanted to make sure we got to. Don was talking about in Kansas has over 22,000 abandoned oil wells on the official listing, and I believe the number is far greater. And help with locating leaking and or uncapped wells would be helpful. Kansas is also now a dumping ground for fracking waste. Operators are buying up old leases, obtaining permits for the enhanced oil recover and water flooding, the EOR. And but what is really happening is that they're accepting the fracking waste and injecting it with no real intention of getting oil out of the old wells. Crumbling casings, this is a real problem for our groundwater and surface water. We want to be able to prove that they're doing this to monitor ground and surface water and to test leaks surrounding the wells. But the problem is there's not a lot of public land here in Kansas, so this work often involves private land or trespassing. Any ideas on how to overcome this and make use of adventure scientists? Are there any working in Kansas currently? Thank you for your wonderful, ingenious work.
Well, first off, thank you, Don. I really appreciate the kind words, and I think that you're doing amazing work, and all of you are doing amazing work to try to address, what I see as one of the biggest threats to water and communities in the United States. I think you pointed out that the double challenges that exist for maybe adventure scientists engagement in somewhere like Kansas, where we don't want to put together a project that would require trespassing in order to get the right information out of the ground, One thought though, and you may have already thought of this, so apologies if you have, is there are potentially technologies out there, and I know there are technologies out there that, depending on the ground cover, you might be able to send up, get funding for like a FLIR camera or like a drone with a camera on it to try to understand where a lot of these abandoned oil and gas wells are if they're on private lands. And then, the next question that probably you're more equipped to answer than I am certainly is, what would happen once you know where these abandoned oil and gas wells are and what's happening with them today? What's the best advocacy step to try to remediate? If they're on private lands, is there a state law on the books, or is there a regulation that requires remediation or something along those lines in a meaningful way? Or are they just going to continue to accept fracking waste and injecting them into these abandoned wells, kind of without any oversight? I don't know the answer to that, but I guess for the only question that I would have any ability to answer is, it would be tough to get adventure scientists out onto private lands, especially in a place where they might not be welcome. But I think that there might be some creative ways to view the world from above in a way that could engage people who are like yourself in these areas and could launch from a place where they legally could launch a drone or a FLIR camera and fly high enough above so that they're not trespassing, but low enough so that they're not violating federal airspace. I don't know if that's an easy answer or not, but it might be some way to think about it. I'd be happy to brainstorm a little more if you want.
Well, and I think another thing that's coming up is that it's clear that there's a lot of need to just continue this discussion, and like for people in different states and people working on different campaigns to be able to like trade information so that when we do answer those questions, we can share them. I know like the Halt Mariner Now campaign that they were talking about, you mentioned drones, so I immediately thought of them because they were talking with someone who was who had a certification to fly drones too. So I have to mention, just because that Halt to Harm has been working on for a while now, the kind of platform that would kind of go beyond just the directory that we have, but the kind of platform where there's more of like a forum built around certain topics. And so it's really organized. It uses a tool called Mighty Networks, and it's just a very, it's really exciting. And I guess I'll just announce it later because it's coming out in January 2020. So that'll help us like sort of bring conversations around these topics that are relevant to us in different states.
And that's awesome to hear. One thing I neglected to mention before is that there's a group called Sky Truth that's based out of West Virginia, and they're doing amazing work. You all might know about them already, but a lot of their work is taking global data sets and analyzing them with a focus on trying to address this problem of fracking and oil and gas expansion or abandoned wells around the world. So we haven't worked directly with them, but we've had a number of conversations with them to try to see how there could be a way forward where both organizations could really contribute to something like this in a meaningful way. So I know that they are really motivated, really well run, and a really great mission as an organization to try to address this very issue.
We were getting data from SkyTruth back in like 2008 here in Southern Tier, New York, too, in terms of just getting information, like when we were first learning about fracking.
That's great.
Don says thanks for the tip.
Yeah, I know there are a number of questions, and there's only a couple minutes left. I want to be able to answer more, and I wanted to pose one thought that it may be kind of a moot point, but it just popped into my mind, which is that the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was originally developed to oppose dam development around the country. So folks who were trying to oppose the building of new, large-scale dams would use the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act to stop dams from going in place. But the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act doesn't have to be cordoned off to dam development. If fracking and oil and gas development are harming watersheds, there might be a way, and there's a whole eligibility set of criteria and a long process and a very politically engaged process, but there are groups like American Rivers and Trout Unlimited that are really working incredibly hard to try to get new rivers onto the Wild and Scenic Rivers system. There might be a way to have the Halt the Harm network or groups within the network say, hey, look, these rivers in West Virginia, they might not be in the Wild and Scenic Rivers system, but they are under threat by fracking or oil and gas development. And one of the best ways to protect them is to get them federally designated as wild and scenic rivers. And so it might be just a different tool in the toolbox. If it's not a tool that you're already using, and if it is, my apologies, but, or my apologies for spending 2 minutes talking about it, but it might be a cool way to think creatively about how to use an existing federal law and tool in a new way, because that's one of the things that American Rivers is really thinking about now. It's like, how do we use the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act to protect more rivers, given that people aren't really building dams anymore? What are some other major threats out there to watersheds and watershed health? Fracking sounds like one of them. So it might be a good entree.
So the last question here from Liz is, there's a tar sands refinery in Colorado, how to get data about pollution.
Like air quality or like air pollution, is that right?
Yeah, Liz, feel free to clarify, but I imagine any kind of pollution. Yes, Liz says yes, air pollution.
Cool. There are a number of really cool tools out there, technological tools that can map localized and regional air pollution, and are small and mobile and deployable, that they're already being used to kind of track local air quality impacts from coal-fired power plants and natural gas plants in areas like that. I imagine that the same could be said for, and local community groups can, if they bond together to buy even one or two of these sensors to be placed in various different areas and downwind of the tar sands plant, or in the direct vicinity, you can get a pretty good sense of what local air quality looks like and why there are impacts. And then the Clean Air Act has, I never worked a ton with the Clean Air Act, but I know that there are certainly different regional, state, and national ambient air quality standards that might be being violated if there's a tar sands plant just spewing pollution out.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for the presentation today. And we are right on time. And I want to wrap up by just sharing a little bit about Halt the Harm. You can go to our website to see, actually, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to share where you can find the replay. So at halttheharm.net, if you go to the either the events or the webinars, although I suppose the events is going to be over, so you won't find it here. But if you go to the webinars area, you'll be able to see the replay, and you can share that. And you can also see past webinars. We have quite a few webinars over the past couple of years, and we keep adding more. And I want to point out as well that you can be featured on our next webinar. And maybe this headline should actually read, offer a presentation to the network, because it's less our webinar. In fact, now I really know I need to change this headline, because it's not really our webinar. We host them for you. So if you have a topic or a presentation, this is a really great way. And so far, a few different campaigns, small grassroots campaigns, have actually used the webinars to start building their audience. So one of the things that we do with Halt the Harm Network is campaign support services. And the way that that looks is essentially helping you build more of an online network around your campaign. So you might use a webinar, for example, to get to advertise your campaign to the network. There's around 14,000 people who've signed up to be supporters. So that's actually a pretty good way to find people. And then that'll start to grow your email list because you'll have a way for people to sign up to hear about you. You might already have an email list, so this is just a way to get more people interested in the work that you're doing, the campaign that you're doing. And so this is both technical support, but then also some media support. And it's totally free for anyone who's part of Halt the Harm Network. So all you have to do is go to the website and join, and then you will get a phone call from somebody on the Welcome Committee, which is a group that, you know, joins up every few months to contact you and learn more about your work so that we can match you up with the type of support services. So that's Halt the Harm Network in a nutshell. And, you know, I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any about that. And yeah, with that, we are right on time. And is there anything else you want to add, Marcus, before we sign off?
Only a thank you for everyone taking the time, and feel free, my email was up at the end, feel free to reach out to me with whatever questions. I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation and chat more, even if it's just to brainstorm and think about how you might best you know, engage the network that you've already got.
And real quick, Robin did write in and said that of 32,000 miles of river, 10 miles are designated as wild and scenic. So 3 out of 100, 1%. So it's pretty pathetic. We really need some help on sampling in some of our major streams.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Don said, is there a way to ask a question after the webinar is over? Want to find resources for testing water samples, which is very expensive by our estimation.
Mm-hmm. So. Yes, the answer to that second question, Don, is definitely yes. And Robin, I saw your comment as well. That was definitely easier said than done to get streams in Central Appalachia and the Ohio River Basin designated as wild and scenic rivers. It's a challenge everywhere, and it takes dedicated people like yourselves and many others many years to get a river into the place where it's designated. It's definitely a labor of love for an ecosystem and for a watershed. You're right. It's a lot of work.
Well, with that, we will be in touch, and thanks for coming to the webinar today.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Take care.